Welcome back to Lighting Design 101 with your instructor, Denise Remping. I am Denise Remping, come to bring you another lesson about basic lighting fundamentals and theory. This video is going to be about using your lighting board. Once you have all of your light plot completed and all your lights hung and focused where they need to be, you will then need to know how to utilize them during a production. Before I get into how to control your lights using your lighting board, I'm going to highly recommend you explore some online tutorials for your particular board. There are many to be found with a simple Google search, and they will be far more in-depth and detailed than what I will be showing you in this video. This will be a very quick and very basic coverage of what you need to know. I have posted a few videos in the description with tutorials on how to use an ETC Ion light board, which is the most popular board used today. But your board may be very different, so a search for tutorials is going to be necessary. There are a few different ways you can use your lights from your lighting board. First of all, I mentioned in a previous video how we assign our lights to channels. You can use your board to control individual channels. Simply press the number of the channel you wish to control, followed by the @ button, then enter the intensity, and then press enter. For example, channel 5 at 50 will set any lights patched into channel 5 at 50% intensity. Or channel 5 at full will set your channel 5 lights at 100%. To keep track of what is happening on stage, your monitor will show which channels are up and at what intensity. You can also control multiple channels at once by using your plus or through buttons. For example, channel 1 through 25 at full will bring up all lights patched into channels 1 through 25 at 100% intensity. This is a key punching method, which will be useful for recording submasters and cues, but during a show, you may not have time to be punching keys in to bring up your lights. You will need them to light up faster than you can type. Most boards these days will have faders or sliders that are programmed to control your individual channels. Your first task will be to learn how to adjust the settings on your faders. Some boards, like this ETC element for example, will have a dial you can turn. On this element, the dial switches from channels 1 through 40 to channels 41 through 80 to channels 81 through 120 to submasters 1 through 40. I'll explain what a submaster is later on. On an ETC Ion, you can adjust the settings on your faders by holding down the Fader Control button, located here, and adjusting the setting on the fader bank. This particular Ion has one 40-channel fader bank, but you can purchase a 20-channel fader bank or multiple banks, depending on the layout you want. By first making sure your faders are set to channels, you can then control your individual channels by simply sliding your faders up and down. This is another way you can control your lights for a production, by sliding your individual channels up and down as needed. However, most theaters you will work in these days will have more than 40 lights to work with, and spending an entire production trying to control 100, 200, 300 lights or more with individual channels will be nearly impossible. Another option instead would be to program your faders as submasters. A submaster is a sort of program you can link to a fader to control individual looks. Using a submaster, you can program several lights into one fader. To record a look into a submaster on an element or Ion, you will first have to set the look you want on stage. You can do this by setting your individual lights where you want them, at the color and/or intensity you want them at. Then you will press Record, Sub, and then the number of the submaster you wish to record. Then hit Enter to finalize. If there is nothing previously recorded in that submaster, then you are done. If there was a previous look recorded in it, then you will have to overwrite the old look. If you look on your monitor, you will see the system has asked you to confirm the overwrite. Repeat this process for each look you want to use in your show. Before you can control your submasters, make sure your faders are set to submasters and not channels. On the Element, this means turning your dial to the submaster setting. On an Ion, you will need to hold down your fader control button and then select the submaster setting on your fader bank. From here, you can control your submasters by sliding your faders up and down. This method works well for shows with very few looks. You can, for example, record some looks that get repeated in your show and then just slide the corresponding faders up and down. Submasters are also great for just recording general looks. This is nice for a facility or theater that has multiple things going on: concerts, seminars, presentations, and so on. You can have a set of pre-recorded looks that will be useful in multiple settings and just leave them there for people to use as needed. For example, Submaster 1 could be recorded as a full stage basic white look. Submaster 2 may be a softer full stage look that's either amber or pink in hue to be less sharp on the eyes. Submaster 3 could be a full blue look. Maybe Submaster 4 is just lighting up your stage apron. Submaster 5 could be a stage right only, and Submaster 6 a stage left. These general looks may be based on what your space's needs are, or what looks get used the most often. A set of pre-recorded submasters can be useful when building a design as well. Before you record any cues, you can record a bunch of looks into your submasters, especially if you know you will use those looks multiple times in a show. For example, if you are doing a production that frequently returns to the same location or setting multiple times throughout the show, then you can set the look into a submaster for you to slide up when you reach that scene as you are recording cues. This saves you the time of having to rebuild a cue over and over again. So what if you are doing a show that has more than just a few looks? This is where recording cues is the preferred method of light control. Most light boards these days have the ability to record a series of lighting cues. To record a cue, first set your stage with the look you want, then press record, then cue, then the number you wish to assign to your cue. For example, record, cue, 2, then enter. Your cues will run in numeric order. The higher the number, the further down on the cue list it will be. When recording cues, you can also control the fade up and fade down times of each cue. All boards will have a set default time. With this Ion, the default is 5 seconds. 5 seconds to bring in the next cue and 5 seconds to fade out the previous cue simultaneously. However, you can change that if you want. For example, you may want a cue to take longer to transition to the next cue. To change this, first make sure you are in the correct cue. This can be accomplished by pressing Go to Cue and then the number of the cue you want. Then press the Time button and enter the amount of time you wish the cue to last in seconds. Here, I have changed the transition time of this cue to 10 seconds. The fade in and fade out do not need to be the same. If you wish, for example, for the previous cue to fade out in 2 seconds, but the next cue to fade in at 10 seconds, you would accomplish this by first inputting your fade in time, 10 seconds, then pressing the time button a second time and entering 2. On the monitor, when you press time the second time, it will display downtime in your cue. Fade in first, fade out second. Press enter and your new times are recorded. Once your cues are recorded, you can cycle through the cues then by pressing the Go button. On this Ion, you will see that above the Go button is also a Stop Back button. If something were to go wrong during a show, you can stop a cue from progressing and/or make the system back up to the previous cue. If you need to jump to a cue at any point, then you can do so by first pressing the Go to Cue button and then typing the number of the cue you want. For example, go to cue 49 and then press enter. Your light board will then automatically jump to cue 49. When numbering cues, you can of course begin with cue number 1, then move on to cue number 2, and so on. However, many lighting designers will tell you that you will often need to add or delete cues after your initial recording of cues. As you watch a tech rehearsal, you may discover that a specific cue just isn't working, or that you need to add in an additional cue you just didn't realize you needed. This can become a problem then if you are simply numbering your cues 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. If you need to add a cue between 3 and 4, what do you label it? You could, for example, label your new cue 3.5, but there are some additional tricks that other designers have developed. Some designers will number their cues by 5s or 10s, so instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, you have cues 5, 10, 15, 20. My personal favorite cueing trick is to label cues by page number. So all my cues on page 1, for example, become 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and so on. Cues on page 20 then become 200, 201, 202, 203, and so on. It is not unusual then for a show I've designed to go from cue 46 to cue 60. This means there were 7 cues on page 4, but then the next cue didn't appear until page 6. However, I've also had shows where 10 cues on one page was not enough. So, I've had pages with cues labeled 60.0, 60.1, 60.2, 60.3 in order to fit in all the cues I needed. When writing your cues into a script, it is important that you make the timing of the cue clear. I, for example, will often put a box around the specific word I'd like the cue to begin on. If the cue is off of something visual on stage, then I will write that specific visual cue into the script approximately where it happens. For example, cue 72 happens when Charlie opens the front door. When writing cues into a script, there are different ways different designers prefer, and some different stage managers have other preferences. Stage managers are the ones who will be calling the cues during a show, telling the light and soundboard operators when to push the go button. Sometimes, stage managers run cues themselves, so it is important that you are all on the same page, so to speak, when labeling cues. I prefer to label my cues LQ for light cue. So you will see a page in my script listing LQ20, LQ21, LQ22, and so on. Some other designers will use LX instead. For shows that I've stage managed or shows that I've done both lights and sound for, I will label light cues as numbers and sound cues as letters. So sound cues become SQA, SQB, SQC, and so on. When I reach Z, then I use double letters, SQAA, SQBB, and so on. While recording your cues, just like anything else you do on a computer, you want to save your progress. I like to say, save often, save always. Nothing strikes fear and dread into a designer more than losing their entire work due to some unforeseen power outage or other unfortunate disaster. To save a show on an Ion board, you must first get into the browser. If your browser isn't already visible, you can press the display button. When your browser menu is open, click to expand File, then click Save As to expand. Under Save As, you will most likely see a list of previous shows saved. Scroll all the way down to the bottom to find New Folder. When you select New Folder, you will be asked to create a new folder name. What you are actually doing with this is saving a new directory where your show will be filed. Once you have the folder named, you will be able to select it from the list, and the console will ask you to then name your show file. I would also highly recommend saving your show to a flash drive. Most boards will come with a USB port where you can plug in a flash drive. Surprisingly, saving a show on a flash drive does not take up a lot of space. I keep a flash drive in my purse at all times with the intention of saving shows on different light boards. I have heard a number of horror stories where an unexpected power surge has fried a light board, or some inexperienced staff member or crew member was playing around on the light board and accidentally deleted an entire show. This is where your flash drive will come in handy. You can very quickly reload your show without having to spend hours rebuilding it from scratch. To save a file to a flash drive on an Ion, insert your flash drive into the USB port provided, then follow the same procedure. Except this time, under Save As, you will find a new option for an F drive. Click to expand, select New Folder, name your folder, then save your show file as you did on the hard drive. This video is very basic in its coverage of using your lighting board. Again, I highly recommend whatever board you may be working with that you dedicate some time to watching online tutorials. I will go so far as to bookmark specific videos I know I will be returning to for refreshers. In the next video, I will show you a few tricks you can use when recording cues for a show, but there is much, much more your board will be able to do. Again, I recommend watching some tutorials to get a sense of what those features are. But if you are just starting out with lighting design, my biggest piece of advice is to KISS. Keep it simple, silly. When in doubt, if there is something complex you want to do but don't have the time to play around and figure it out, then nix the complex and go for something simpler. Start simple until you are ready to move to the next level.